tonight. You step beyond the torchlit gates of a medieval castle and into the hidden dining rooms of kings and queens, not the grand feasts you see in paintings, but the secret meals whispered about behind heavy oak doors, strange remedies, spiced wines, almond milk fasts, sugared medicines, and royal fears of poison hiding beneath silver plates. You'll discover what medieval rulers truly ate to survive long winters, restless nights, and dangerous courts where even supper could become a political weapon. So before we settle beside the fire, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy these quiet journeys into the medieval world. Now dim the lights, and let the castle bells guide you into the night. Hey guys, tonight you find yourself beneath the dripping gate arch of a royal fortress while winter mist curls through the torchlight like pale river ghosts. Your boots sink into churned mud mixed with straw and horse dung, which, to be fair, medieval travel brochures really oversold as the perfume of prosperous roads. Above you, blackbirds shift along the battlements, and somewhere deeper inside the castle, a bell tolls slowly through the damp evening air. Smoke hangs beneath the rafters of nearby stables, wet wool cloaks steam beside braziers. A tired mule sneezes directly into your sleeve with the confidence of a creature that pays no taxes and fears no king. You pass beneath oak doors banded in iron, so cold they almost sting your fingers. The guards barely glance at you. Everyone here looks exhausted in the way only medieval people can manage, half-frozen, underfed, and somehow still expected to attend formal supper without complaint. Honestly, you probably would not last a week out here before begging for indoor plumbing and a mattress that does not smell faintly of turnips. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while the fire crackles low beside you tonight, feel free to comment your location and local time as you settle in for the journey. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The castle rises around you in layers of wet stone and narrow windows glowing gold against the dusk. Servants hurry through the courtyard carrying baskets covered in linen cloths. Stable boys drag barrels toward the kitchens. Somewhere nearby, dogs bark furiously at absolutely nothing, which seems to be one of their chief medieval responsibilities. You move slowly with the evening crowd toward the great hall, where tonight's supper is already being prepared. The scent reaches you before the doors open, fully roasted onions, wood smoke, dripping fat, rosemary crushed beneath hurried feet, and the sharp sweetness of imported wine. Beneath it all lies the old smell every castle carries, damp rushes spread across stone floors, ancient soot, wet wool drying by fires, and too many people breathing the same cold air. Inside, beeswax candles flicker in iron stands along the walls. Their light dances across painted shields and faded banners overhead. Nobles gather near the raised dais wrapped in fur-lined cloaks, while lower servants remain close to the edges of the room, trying not to be noticed unless needed. A harp player plucks softly in the corner, though no one appears to be listening except one sleepy greyhound sprawled beneath a bench. At first glance, the royal supper looks exactly as stories promise. Platters of venison rest beside trenchers of coarse bread. Roasted swans arrive with feathers carefully reattached for display, because medieval cooks never met a perfectly reasonable meal without deciding to make it theatrical. Steaming pottages bubble in heavy bowls, silver cups shine beside towers of cheese, smoked fish, almonds, figs, and sugared nuts imported at enormous expense from southern ports. But as you linger near the servants carrying dishes toward the high table, you begin noticing something strange. The king does not eat most of it. while courtiers tear greedily into roasted meats. The ruler seated beneath the canopy receives smaller plates brought quietly from a side kitchen hidden behind a tapestry. The dishes are plain compared to the feast displayed before the hall. Thin slices of poached river fish, stewed pears dusted with herbs, brown bread carefully trimmed of hard crusts, warm wine mixed with honey and unfamiliar powders. A bent old servant notices your curiosity and gives a knowing look. Public food, he mutters quietly while adjusting a platter, and real food. Before you can ask more, he disappears back toward the kitchens. You follow carefully along the wall where the firelight grows dimmer. Here the warmth fades quickly. Draughts creep through cracks in the stone. A line of kitchen boys rushes past, carrying copper pots blackened by soot. One nearly collides with you and mutters an apology before vanishing into steam and smoke. Beyond the tapestry lies a narrower chamber lit by smaller candles. The noise of the hall dulls immediately. Here, cooks whisper instead of shout. You watch as a royal physician inspects trays before allowing them onward. He wears dark robes lined with lamb fur, and his sleeves smell faintly of vinegar and dried herbs. Beside him rests a small leather book filled with careful notes. The physician touches a spoon to each dish, sometimes shaking his head before ordering more pepper, less salt, or additional warming spices. No one can quite agree whether medieval physicians healed people or simply bullied food until it became medicine. One tray contains boiled capons seasoned lightly with fennel. Another carries soft cheese mixed with crushed mint. A third holds tiny onions simmered in almond milk. Everything seems measured, balanced, restrained. You overhear fragments as servants pass. The king slept poorly. Too much beef last week. His stomach remains cold. More cinnamon tonight. The physician finally nods approval over a cup of thickened wine mixed with egg yolk and honey. It smells rich enough to wake the dead, though perhaps not pleasantly. In medieval courts, diet is rarely about pleasure alone. Food belongs to the strange world of humours, the belief that the body balances heat, cold, dryness, and moisture like an unpredictable soup pot. Kings and queens eat not simply to satisfy hunger, but to maintain harmony inside the body itself. Too much roasted meat may overheat the blood. Too many pears might cool the stomach dangerously. Fish on the wrong day could weaken the spirit or strengthen it, even now. It is hard to tell whether the physicians truly understood any of this, or merely sounded convincing while holding expensive spices. Still, everyone obeys them. A servant girl passes carrying a tiny silver container no larger than your palm. Inside rests a dark paste made from dates, herbs, and crushed roots. She whispers that the queen eats a spoonful each night before sleep to aid digestion and protect against winter illness. Some swear it also prevents bad dreams. Others insist it causes them. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. The deeper kitchen glows red from open hearth fires. Enormous cauldrons hang from iron hooks while cooks sweat despite the cold outdoors. Boys turn spits endlessly beside the flames. Flour dust drifts through warm air like pale smoke. Somewhere a cat prowls beneath tables hunting mice bold enough to approach the grain sacks. You settle briefly near a stack of firewood where an older cook trims herbs beside a candle stub melted almost flat. Royal stomachs, he sighs, chopping parsley. More troublesome than royal wars. He explains that kings rarely eat the heavy feasts shown to visitors. Public banquets display wealth and power, but private meals follow stricter rules. Light meats, cooked fruits, gentle wines, soft breads, spices believed to warm the heart during damp weather. Physicians constantly fear imbalance, bloating, fever, or melancholy. Melancholy, in medieval thinking, appears capable of arriving from almost anything. Cold weather, overripe apples, reading too much, looking at marshes, existing after sunset. Frankly, it sounds exhausting. Outside the narrow windows, night settles fully across the castle grounds. Rain taps softly against the shutters. Monastery bells far beyond the walls begin marking the late hour, their echoes drifting faintly through the dark countryside. The feast continues loudly in the great hall, but here behind the tapestries and kitchen smoke, the true royal table reveals itself careful, fearful, strangely quiet. And somewhere deeper within the castle, another private supper is already being prepared for the queen alone. The smell of rosemary and damp ashes follows you out from the kitchens as the castle settles deeper into night. Behind the walls, the wind moves across frozen courtyards with a long, low whistle, slipping beneath shutters and rattling loose iron hinges somewhere high above. Most of the great hall still roars with music and cups striking oak tables, yet here in the quieter passages servants move softly with lowered voices, carrying candles through narrow corridors that seem to twist endlessly through stone. You follow one such servant now. She carries a tray no larger than a prayer book, covered carefully with linen embroidered in fading blue thread. Beneath the cloth something clinks gently with each step. She walks quickly, head bowed, crossing a dim gallery where saints painted on the walls peer down through centuries of smoke stains. The air changes as you move farther from the hall. Less meat smoke, more beeswax, lavender, and herbs drying from ceiling beams. The castle's still room lies ahead, a chamber most guests never see, though nearly every noble household depends upon it. Here remedies are brewed beside perfumes, preserves, oils, sleeping draughts, syrups, and the strange medicinal wines consumed by kings and queens before dawn and after dusk. The servant nudges open the oak door with her hip. Warmth spills outward immediately. Inside, shelves crowd every wall from floor to rafters. Clay jars sealed with wax sit beside bundles of thyme, mint, rue, fennel, sage, and dried roses hanging upside down like sleeping birds. Small windows fog with steam from simmering kettles. Mortars and pestles clutter the tables. Copper pans gleam beside bottles filled with liquids of every imaginable colour: amber, crimson, cloudy green, deep violet. At the centre of it all stands the Queen's chief attendant, an older woman wrapped in a thick wool gown lined with squirrel fur. Her sleeves smell faintly of vinegar and cloves. "You are late," she mutters to the servant without looking up. "The hall delayed us." "The hall delays everyone. That is its chief talent." She lifts the linen cloth from the tray, revealing tiny silver cups and a narrow flask sealed with red wax. Instantly the room fills with the scent of cinnamon and warmed honey. You edge closer. The attendant notices but seems too tired to object. Medieval castles often contain so many wandering officials, pilgrims, scribes, cousins, musicians, guards, and holy men that eventually everyone simply accepts strangers standing quietly in corners. On the table before her rests tonight's preparation for the Queen: warmed Hippocras wine infused with spices from distant ports, almond milk thickened with honey, and a soft paste made from figs and herbs crushed together beneath stone. The attendant stirs one mixture carefully. She coughs at night. She murmurs to another woman grinding dried flowers nearby. "Too much cold air in chapel yesterday." The second woman nods solemnly, as though cold chapel air ranks among the kingdom's gravest enemies. Perhaps it does. In the medieval world, queens and kings live surrounded by remedies. Some are sensible enough: honey for sore throats, mint for unsettled stomachs, willow bark for pain. Others drift into stranger territory: powdered pearls dissolved in wine, gold flakes stirred into broth, tiny charms sewn into sleeves to prevent fever, dried hare feet hung near beds to ease childbirth. Some swear that drinking wine steeped with emerald dust strengthens the heart. Others claim it merely ruins perfectly good wine. No one can quite agree whether the remedies work, but everyone agrees they are expensive. The attendant uncorks the narrow flask. A sharp herbal scent escapes immediately. "Wormwood," she says, "just enough." She pours several careful drops into the Queen's evening cup. You try not to imagine the flavour. Near the hearth, another servant turns small oat cakes upon a flat iron pan. These are not feast foods meant for display. They are private comforts, warm breads brushed with butter, stewed apples softened nearly to cream, soft cheeses wrapped in linen to keep away draughts. Quiet foods for quiet hours. Beyond the still room, distant bells echo through the castle chapel. Compline prayers are ending. Somewhere corridors creak as tired monks shuffle back toward guest quarters, carrying lanterns through the dark. The attendant hands the tray to a younger maid at last. "Careful on the stairs," she warns. Last month Lord Edric dropped the king's sleeping cordial. The younger maid winces. What happened? The physician called it a tragedy. You suspect the physician meant the spilled spices, not the sleepless king. The maid disappears toward the royal chambers while you linger beside the shelves. Candlelight flickers over handwritten labels tied with string. One jar contains preserved cherries floating in syrup darker than blood. Another stores candied ginger worth nearly its weight in silver. Tiny packets of saffron rest locked inside a carved box because even cooks cannot entirely trust one another around saffron. A thin old woman sits near the fire stripping rosemary leaves into a bowl. Her fingers move slowly but precisely. "You travel?" she asks suddenly. "A little." She nods as though that explains every hardship imaginable. Then she tells you that courts across Europe each favour their own hidden diets. Northern kings prefer heavier meats and dark ales against winter cold. Southern queens drink citrus infusions and lighter wines believed to cool the blood. Some nobles refuse raw fruit entirely, fearing it breeds fever inside the stomach. Others eat preserved quince before bed because physicians insist it encourages pleasant dreams. Even now, it's hard to tell whether medieval rulers fear hunger more than illness itself. You wander toward the back alcove where the room grows quieter still. Here a small writing desk stands beside shelves of folded parchment. An ink-stained scribe sits copying recipes by candlelight into a leather-bound household book. Not cooking recipes, medical recipes. One line catches your eye. For heaviness of spirit after rich suppers, boil time with wine and consume before moonrise. Another advises powdered anise mixed with goat milk against coldness of the inward organs, which sounds both deeply serious and suspiciously made up. The scribe yawns. Court physicians change their minds every winter, he says. Last year pears were dangerous. This year pears restore vigour. And next year, perhaps pears become sinful. You almost laugh aloud. A draught brushes through the room as someone opens the outer door. Snow has begun falling lightly in the courtyard beyond. Tiny white flakes drift briefly through torchlight before melting on the warm stone floor. The women move calmly despite the late hour. Medieval nights rarely bring true rest inside great households. Someone always bakes bread. Someone stirs medicines. Someone watches fires. Someone carries hot bricks to royal beds wrapped in cloth to warm frozen feet beneath blankets. The old rosemary woman gestures toward the shelves again. Queens sleep lightly, she says, too many eyes upon them. You glance toward the dark stairwell leading upward to private chambers. There, somewhere beyond carved doors and heavy curtains, The queen now drinks her warm spiced mixture while servants bank the hearth low for the night. Perhaps she trusts the remedies. Perhaps she merely obeys tradition because queens are expected to appear calm while swallowing all manner of strange concoctions, prepared by people named things like Brother Aldwin the Humble. Outside, the snow thickens softly over rooftops and towers. Inside, the stillroom glows gold and quiet against the winter dark, smelling of honey, herbs, hot wine, and old beliefs no one entirely understands anymore. And before dawn arrives, the king himself will wake for another carefully measured meal. Before dawn fully arrives, the castle already stirs around you like some enormous sleeping animal reluctantly opening one eye. The corridors remain dark except for scattered lanterns burning low in iron brackets. Frost feathers the narrow window slits. Somewhere below, a servant coughs into the silence while hauling water across the courtyard. Another bell tolls from the chapel tower, softer now in the thick winter air. You wake on a pallet near the kitchen passage wrapped in a wool blanket that smells faintly of smoke and sheep. Honestly, medieval bedding possesses an impressive ability to contain every scent ever encountered by humanity. Your shoulders ache from the stone beneath the straw mattress, and one of your boots has apparently become home to a determined castle mouse during the night. Outside the shutters, the world remains blue-grey with early cold. The kitchens, however, blaze like furnaces. You follow the growing warmth downstairs where servants move through rising steam carrying trenchers, pitchers, and baskets piled with bread. Morning meals in royal household begin long before nobles wake. Fires must be stirred back to life, ale warmed, porridge thickened, fresh rushes scattered across parts of the floor where last night's feasting became especially enthusiastic. A kitchen boy drags out a bucket of stale rushes and mutters darkly about noblemen who miss spittoons by several feet. You suspect this complaint repeats daily across Europe. Inside the main kitchen hall, spits hang empty now after the previous night's feast, but smaller hearths crackle steadily. Oatcakes bake upon flat stones. Pots of pottage simmer gently beside kettles of heated ale mixed with honey and spices. Loaves of coarse brown bread cool beneath linen cloths, while cooks slice hard cheese with long iron knives. Breakfast, in the medieval court, is a quieter affair than supper, less spectacle, less ceremony, more caution. Especially for royalty, you notice it again almost immediately. While lesser nobles gather around shared trestle tables tearing hunks of bread and dipping them into thick onion pottage, servants prepare separate trays for the king and queen behind a wooden screen near the fire. A young cook explains in whispers while carefully poaching eggs in wine. The king avoids heavy meat before noon now. Because of the physician. Because of the physician's lectures. He rolls his eyes so dramatically you fear they may never return. Nearby another servant slices pears into thin crescents before sprinkling them with crushed cloves. A silver dish holds smoked river trout beside soft cheese mixed with herbs. Fresh butter rests in tiny carved moulds shaped like flowers. The royal breakfast appears modest compared to the grand feast of the night before, though every ingredient remains costly and carefully chosen. No one can quite agree whether medieval kings truly enjoyed eating under such constant supervision. At last the king himself appears. Not grandly, not triumphantly, just tired. Wrapped in a fur-lined robe over his linen nightshirt, he enters a smaller private chamber beside the kitchens where only close attendants follow. Candlelight reveals deep shadows beneath his eyes. His beard remains slightly uneven from hurried grooming. One hand rests against his stomach as though negotiating terms with it. You remain near the doorway with the other unnoticed household shadows. The physician arrives moments later carrying a small wooden case filled with powders and folded notes. He bows deeply, then immediately begins discussing digestion before the poor king has even sat down. Your Grace slept. Poorly. The venison yesterday was too dry. The venison yesterday was delicious. Unfortunately, those are not the same thing. The king sighs heavily and accepts a cup of warmed ale anyway. Breakfast begins slowly. Soft eggs, brown bread dipped in wine, pears cooked gently to avoid cooling the stomach excessively, smoked fish seasoned with fennel, nothing fried heavily, nothing overly salted, nothing considered difficult to digest during the vulnerable morning hours. The physician watches like a hawk guarding sacred treasure. You notice the queen enters later through another side door. Unlike the king, she appears fully dressed already in layered wool and dark blue velvet trimmed modestly with fur. A thin gold chain glimmers at her throat. Her breakfast proves even lighter: almond milk warmed with cinnamon, oat bread, figs preserved in honey, and watered wine. Some swear noblewomen avoid certain foods entirely to preserve pale skin and calm temperaments. Others insist these restrictions exist merely because court physicians enjoy inventing rules for women. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. The queen eats slowly while listening to petitions from 2 waiting ladies regarding cloth inventories and candle shortages. Medieval rulership rarely pauses for peaceful meals. Someone always needs grain counted or taxes argued or sheep discussed at inappropriate hours. A servant refills cups from a steaming pitcher. Not coffee, of course. That pleasure lies centuries away. Instead, the room smells of weak ale, herbs, smoke, and warmed wine mixed with spices expensive enough to fund a small village. One older nobleman at the lower table tears enthusiastically into cold sausage left from supper. The physician notices and visibly suffers. You will regret that by noon, he warns. The nobleman shrugs. If God wishes me punished for sausage, he knows where to find me. A fair point, honestly. The morning outside brightens slowly through narrow windows. Snow dusts the courtyard roofs now. Stable hands lead steaming horses toward the gates, while servants sweep icy slush from the chapel steps. Somewhere deep within the walls, a dog begins barking again at invisible enemies. You sit briefly near the side hearth where a maid warms her hands over glowing embers. She explains quietly that royal meals follow not only health beliefs, but strict rituals of rank. The finest white bread belongs to nobles. Dark rye loaves go to servants. Certain spices appear only at high tables. Even seating arrangements reflect power. Who eats nearest the fire matters, she says. And who eats nearest the king? That matters even more. She points towards stacked trenchers awaiting distribution. Thick slices of stale bread serve as plates during many meals, soaking juices and sauces before eventually feeding servants, beggars, or dogs. Nothing valuable goes to waste here except perhaps common sense and several generations of physicians arguing over onions. The queen finishes first. Before leaving, she accepts a tiny cloth packet from the physician containing dried herbs meant to be steeped later in hot wine. She thanks him politely, though her expression suggests she would rather receive literally anything else. Then she disappears toward chapel accompanied by 2 candle-bearing attendants. The king lingers longer over warmed bread and fish while discussing hunting routes with the steward. Outside the windows, pale sunlight finally touches the snow-covered battlements. Morning fully arrives, and with it the castle shifts once more into its endless rhythm of work, scribes scratching ink onto parchment, servants hauling wood, cooks baking coarse bread, guards stomping warmth into frozen feet beside gate fires. Yet even amid all this movement, the hidden diets continue quietly behind carved doors and hanging tapestries. Carefully measured meals, secret remedies, tiny restrictions guiding the lives of people powerful enough to command armies, but apparently not powerful enough to eat sausage peacefully. As the breakfast chamber empties, the physician gathers his notes with solemn importance. Then, very quietly, he steals the last preserved fig from the Queen's untouched dish before anyone notices. Perhaps even medieval physicians possess limits to their discipline after all. Section 4. The morning drifts onward beneath a pale winter sky, and by midday the castle already feels older somehow, as though each hour adds another layer of smoke and weariness to its stones. Snow melts slowly from the battlements in thin silver trails. In the courtyards below, carts creak through slush while servants scatter fresh straw across muddy paths that immediately become muddy again. Medieval sanitation remains a deeply optimistic profession. You leave the royal kitchens behind at last and follow a narrow road winding away from the castle hill toward the monastery that watches over the valley beyond. The physician, apparently convinced that fresh abbey records might improve the king's digestion, has sent for several copied texts on diet and humours. A pair of servants carry sealed baskets beside you, while a skinny brown dog trots faithfully at your heels. You're not entirely sure when the dog began following you, only that it now behaves as though you have shared several wars together. Cold air stings your face as you descend the frosted road. The monastery bells sound before the buildings appear through the mist. Low stone walls emerge first, then dark roofs streaked with damp moss, then finally the abbey itself rising above bare winter orchards. Thin smoke curls from chimneys. Rows of cabbages sleep beneath frost in the gardens. A few hooded monks move silently between buildings carrying firewood and buckets of water, their sandals scraping against frozen earth. The place smells of wet stone, wood smoke, old parchment, and boiled vegetables, which is to say extremely monastic. A novice leads you through the gatehouse and into the guest hall where travellers warm themselves beside a long fire. Pilgrims sit wrapped in patched cloaks eating coarse bread dipped in onion broth. One old man sleeps upright with a pilgrim badge pinned crookedly to his hat. Nearby, a monk carefully trims candle wicks while murmuring prayers beneath his breath. Even here, far from court, food remains a serious matter, especially among monks. You're eventually guided into the monastery kitchens where the heat fogs your vision instantly. Great iron pots hang above open fires, steam rises from lentils and barley, fresh loaves cool on wooden boards dusted with flour. The scent is simpler than the royal kitchen's less spice, less wine, fewer rich meats but no less comforting. At the far table sits Brother Anselm, the abbey's infirmarian and keeper of dietary records. Ink stains darken his fingers permanently. His robes smell faintly of lavender and smoke. Before him lie several manuscripts held open with smooth river stones. He squints up at you. You come from the castle. Yes. He sighs deeply. Then someone's stomach has become political again. The servants exchange weary looks. Brother Anselm gestures for you to sit near the fire while he continues grinding herbs into powder. Beside him, another monk slices leeks into a bubbling cauldron with the solemn focus of a man performing sacred surgery. Monasteries preserve much of medieval medical knowledge, though knowledge occasionally means copying older books nobody fully understands. Here, monks study ancient theories of balance within the body heat and cold, moisture and dryness, blood and bile. Every food possesses a nature. Every season alters digestion. Every person requires careful adjustment according to temperament, age, weather, and God alone knows what else. The monk taps one manuscript. Winter weakens the stomach, he explains. Therefore warm foods become necessary: cinnamon, ginger, cooked onions, gentle wines. Another monk overhears and mutters, "Brother Lucien ate warm onions every day and still died from falling into a mill pond." Brother Anselm ignores him completely. You notice shelves lined with jars containing herbs, dried berries, powders, and strange preserved roots. A small cage near the wall holds several fat leeches floating lazily in cloudy water. The monastery cat watches them with suspicious fascination. Brother Anselm asks what the king currently eats. When told of the poached fish and softened pears, he nods thoughtfully. Reasonable. Then comes the Queen's almond milk. He grimaces slightly. Fashionable. A younger novice nearby whispers that almond milk appears in nearly every noble household during fast days because animal milk is often forbidden under church rules. Some cooks become astonishingly skilled at turning crushed almonds into creamy sauces for fish, pottages, and pastries. Others merely produce expensive sadness in a bowl. No one can quite agree whether anyone truly enjoys it. The monks invite you to dine with them at the noon meal. You sit upon rough benches beneath smoke-blackened rafters, while monastery bells echo through the hall. Meals here pass mostly in silence, except for one elderly monk reading aloud from scripture near the hearth. Today's meal consists of barley pottage thickened with leeks, coarse bread, smoked herring, and weak ale. Simple food, heavy food, honest food. And after days among royal tables, it tastes strangely comforting. The brown dog settles beside your feet immediately in the confident manner of creatures who assume all food belongs partly to them by divine decree. Across the table, Brother Anselm continues discussing the diets of rulers. Kings eat too richly in public and too cautiously in private, he says quietly. Queens spend half their lives fasting. Nobles fear fatness, fever, poison, sleeplessness, cold humours, hot humours, sour humours. He waves a spoon vaguely. Meanwhile, peasants eat cabbage until winter ends. A fair summary of medieval society, honestly. After the meal, he leads you deeper into the abbey library where narrow windows cast pale light over rows of chained books. The air smells wonderfully of parchment, dust, candle wax, and damp wool drying near braziers. Scribes bend over desks copying medical texts with aching fingers. One manuscript contains elaborate dietary charts assigning foods to humoral categories: beef warms and dries, fish cools and moistens. Apples vary suspiciously depending on the author's mood. Apparently. Even now, it is hard to tell whether medieval physicians practiced medicine or simply organized ingredients into very confident poetry. Brother Anselm shows you a peculiar illustration depicting a crowned king surrounded by foods thought proper for rulers: roasted pheasant, figs, wine, almonds, soft eggs, and cooked fruits. Beneath the image someone has added a warning in faded ink. Too much pleasure at table weakens both body and judgment. The monk smiles faintly. Monks write that often. Do kings listen? Rarely. Outside the library windows, afternoon snow begins falling once more across the silent cloisters. A bell rings for prayers. Monks rise slowly from desks, stretching stiff backs and rubbing cramped hands before disappearing into shadowed corridors. You linger a moment longer near the fire. The abbey feels quieter than the castle, slower. Yet even here food governs life with strange seriousness. Meals mark hours, fasts shape seasons, remedies travel between kitchens and chapels alike. And somewhere back at court, the royal physician now waits impatiently for these copied monastery texts, hoping ancient ink might somehow settle a king's troublesome appetite before tonight's supper begins again. By the time you leave the monastery, The snow has softened into freezing rain that drifts sideways across the valley in thin silver sheets. Your cloak grows steadily heavier with damp. Water slides from the edges of your hood and gathers at your cuffs. The brown dog following you looks equally miserable, though determined to preserve a little dignity about it. The road toward town has become a ribbon of mud churned by carts, pilgrims, and livestock. Wheels sink deep into frozen ruts. A broken wagon leans beside a ditch while two men argue hopelessly over an axle already beyond saving. Nearby, a woman sells hot chestnuts beneath a canvas awning sagging under rainwater. The market town appears gradually through the weather, timber houses crouched close together, smoke drifting low from chimneys, church towers fading pale behind mist. Even from outside the walls, you can smell it already wet wool, baking bread, horses, fish brine, damp hay, wood smoke, and the unmistakable odour of several hundred people attempting medieval hygiene with admirable but limited success. A guard beneath the gatehouse roof collects market tolls while stamping his frozen feet for warmth. He barely glances at you before waving the monastery servants onward. Inside, the streets pulse with slow winter activity. Vendors shout beneath dripping awnings. Geese protest loudly from wicker cages. Blacksmith hammers ring from nearby alleys. Somewhere a child slips in the mud and begins crying with the theatrical despair only cold children can produce. The royal household has sent you here for supplies impossible to grow or prepare within the castle itself. Spices, preserved fruits, imported sugars, small luxuries hidden behind the grand language of medicinal necessity, which, conveniently, allows nobles to enjoy expensive sweets while claiming they are practically medicine. You pass stalls piled with onions, cabbages, smoked eels, and rough brown loaves still warm from ovens. Women wrapped in shawls sell thick oat pottage from steaming pots. A butcher hacks frozen pork while muttering prayers against slipping knives. But the finest goods gather near the covered spice arcade close to the Guildhall. Here the smells change entirely. Cinnamon, cloves, pepper, nutmeg, ginger, citrus peel. Strange perfumes from distant ports drifting through cold northern air like pieces of another world entirely. The spice merchant himself sits wrapped in layers of wool and fur behind a counter, crowded with tiny scales and locked wooden boxes. His beard forks neatly into 2 silver points. Rings glitter on stiff fingers stained yellow from saffron dust. He watches the castle servants approach and smiles immediately. Nothing warms a merchant faster than royal money. You come for winter stock. And preserved fruits, one servant replies. The merchant nods knowingly and unlocks several containers one by one. Inside rest candied orange peels, sugared ginger, dates packed tightly in straw, dried figs, raisins, almonds, and tiny cones of precious sugar imported through dangerous trade routes stretching farther than most villagers can even imagine. Sugar in the medieval world remains closer to medicine than everyday food. Apothecaries sell it beside herbs and powders. Physicians prescribe it carefully in syrups and digestive tonics. Queens nibble sugared seeds after meals to settle the stomach and sweeten the breath. Some swear sugar strengthens the heart itself. Others insist it slowly rots the body from within. No one can quite agree, though everyone agrees it tastes marvellous. The spice merchant lifts a small jar beneath your nose. Candied fennel, he says proudly, excellent after heavy meats. You try one cautiously. Sweetness blooms first, then sharp herbal warmth. Honestly, it tastes like a monastery garden accidentally wandered into dessert. Nearby, another customer argues fiercely over pepper prices while rain drums against the shutters overhead. Pepper matters enormously here. Not because medieval food spoils constantly, as people later like to imagine, but because spices display wealth, sophistication, and access to distant trade. A lord seasoning his food generously announces power with every bite. Also, pepper makes bland winter stews slightly less depressing. A useful quality in February. The merchant carefully measures saffron threads onto a tiny scale. Even the smallest amount costs enough to feed a peasant family for weeks. Yet royal kitchens demand it constantly for sauces, wines, pastries, and medicinal broths intended to warm noble blood during damp weather. You notice one locked chest sitting separately beneath the counter. The merchant catches your glance. "Sugar from Cyprus," he says softly, "reserved for noble households only." He opens the lid just enough to reveal pale sugar loaves wrapped in cloth. The servants beside you exchange impressed looks. In royal courts, these ingredients remain partly secret because diet itself has become political. A queen drinking imported citrus syrup suggests refinement and influence. A king receiving exotic spices at breakfast demonstrates connections stretching across seas and kingdoms. Even food whispers about power. The market grows louder as noon approaches. Bells ring from the church square while traders hurry beneath worsening rain. You wander deeper among the stalls where cooks sell hot eel pies and thick slices of honey cake beneath smoking lanterns. The brown dog receives scraps from at least 4 vendors and now follows you with religious devotion. Near the fishmongers, you overhear women discussing noble fasting habits. They eat fish 3 days a week. 4 during Lent. My cousin worked in the bishop's kitchens once. Said they turned almond milk into fake cheese so nobody missed meat. The second woman snorts. God sees everything. Yes, but apparently bishops still try. You continue past a physician's stall where dried herbs hang beside jars of powders and bundles of leeches floating sleepily in glass. A painted sign promises cures for stomach coldness, sluggish digestion, nightmares, swollen joints, weak appetite, and female disturbances, which could mean almost anything in medieval medicine. Even now, it is hard to tell whether half these remedies heal people or simply keep them busy enough to forget symptoms temporarily. At last the servants finish their bargaining. Crates are packed with preserved fruits, spice packets, medicinal sugars, and wines infused with herbs requested specifically by the royal physician. The merchant bows low while wrapping the saffron carefully in waxed cloth. "For the Queen's health," he says solemnly. "For the Queen's table," one servant mutters once you leave. Rain continues falling steadily as you cross the market square again. Smoke curls from cook fires beneath dripping awnings. Pilgrims huddle beside walls sharing coarse bread and weak ale. Somewhere a lute player sings badly enough to qualify as a form of civic punishment. Yet beneath all the noise and mud, you begin understanding something important. Royal diets do not merely feed kings and queens. They connect monasteries, markets, physicians, merchants, sailors, cooks, herb gardens, spice caravans, and entire towns struggling through winter. A queen's evening syrup might pass through 10 hands before reaching her silver cup. And tonight, back inside the warm castle kitchens, those costly ingredients will quietly disappear into another careful royal meal hidden behind the spectacle of feasting. By the time you return to the castle, evening presses low across the valley like damp wool pulled over the world. Rainwater drips steadily from the gatehouse chains. Torches hiss in the wet air. Somewhere beyond the outer walls, a cartwheel breaks with a crack loud enough to send birds scattering from the battlements. Inside, however, the mood has changed entirely. The great hall stands quieter tonight. No roasted swans parade through the doors. No musicians pluck lively dances near the fire. The rushes on the floor have been freshly scattered with lavender and sweet herbs. yet the tables themselves hold simpler fare beneath the candlelight. It is a fast day. The Queen's household observes Lent strictly this week, and even the King, after much theatrical sighing according to several servants, has agreed to reduced indulgence for the evening meal. You step into the warmth carrying the market supplies while the brown dog shakes rainwater enthusiastically onto a passing nobleman's cloak. The nobleman looks personally betrayed by existence itself. Along the walls, servants arrange platters of river fish, trenchers of coarse bread, bowls of lentil pottage, onions roasted slowly in ashes, and dishes of stewed apples sweetened only lightly with honey. Pitchers of watered wine replace the heavier spiced cups from previous nights. At first glance it seems humble. Then you notice the almond milk. Barrels of it. Pale, creamy, faintly sweet, and astonishingly important. During religious fasts, medieval Christians often avoid animal products entirely. No meat, sometimes no butter, milk, or eggs either. Which means cooks across Europe spend centuries attempting to convince people that crushed almonds mixed with water somehow count as joy. To be fair, skilled kitchens do remarkable things with it. The castle cooks tonight prepare almond cream soups scented with saffron, delicate fish stews thickened into velvet-like sauces, and little pastries filled with spiced fruit paste. One tray even carries fake eggs made from almond mixture dyed yellow with herbs. A kitchen boy whispers. The bishop praised those once. Another boy mutters back. The bishop also blessed his own wine cellar. Fair observation. You follow the preparations toward a smaller side chamber reserved for the Queen's private table during fasting periods. Here the atmosphere feels softer than the noisy feasts of earlier nights. Beeswax candles glow steadily against tapestries showing saints wandering forests with expressions suggesting they too would prefer a warm blanket. The Queen sits near the hearth wrapped in dark green wool trimmed modestly with ermine. Her ladies embroider quietly nearby while servants lay out the evening meal. No one speaks loudly. Fasting days carry a strange stillness in medieval courts. Less performance, less drinking, more prayer, or at least more discussion about prayer while eating elaborately disguised fish. The physician arrives carrying a small cup. Again, you begin suspecting this man appears beside meals the way ravens appear beside battlefields. Tonight's preparation smells faintly of mint and anise. For digestion during fasting, he explains. The Queen accepts it politely. No one can quite agree whether medieval fasting purifies the soul, improves health, or simply gives physicians new opportunities to discuss intestines at length. Perhaps all three. The meal begins with warm pottage made from peas and onions simmered slowly in almond milk. Thick slices of rye bread accompany it, still steaming from the ovens. Then come river trout cooked gently with herbs, followed by stewed figs and apples sprinkled with cinnamon brought from the market earlier that day. The King arrives late, very late, and visibly disappointed. He stares at the fish in silence before lowering himself heavily into his chair. Again, the Queen does not even glance up. It is Lent. It was also Lent yesterday. It shall be Lent tomorrow as well, unless you intend to argue directly with the Church. The King mutters something into his wine cup that sounds deeply untheological. A servant nearly chokes trying not to laugh. Even in royal households, fasting proves difficult during long winters. Nobles accustomed to rich meats suddenly face weeks of fish, grains, legumes, and carefully rationed pleasures. Some obey sincerely. Others search constantly for loopholes. Certain monasteries famously classify beavers as fish because they swim, which feels less like theology and more like exhausted people desperately wanting stew. Those who tell the tale never fully agree how seriously such rules are truly enforced. The physician recommends smaller portions tonight to maintain inward balance. The king ignores him almost immediately by reaching for extra bread. The queen notices but says nothing, though one eyebrow rises with devastating precision. Outside the narrow windows, rain taps softly against shutters while distant bells echo through the dark valley below. You sit near the edge of the chamber beside a low brazier warming chilled hands. The brown dog curls nearby, already asleep beside a pile of firewood with the peaceful confidence of creatures unconcerned by dietary law. One older lady at court explains quietly that queens often fast more strictly than kings. Some believe restraint demonstrates virtue and discipline. Others whisper that noble women eat lightly to preserve beauty, fertility, and delicate health. Still others suspect court life simply leaves little appetite after endless ceremonies and political manoeuvring. Even now, it is hard to tell where religion ends and performance begins inside great households. The meal continues slowly. A harp sounds softly from another chamber. Candles burn lower. Servants refill cups with diluted wine infused gently with rosemary. One maid carries around tiny sugared seeds believed to aid digestion after fish meals. The king accepts 2 handfuls immediately. The queen notices again. So much for restraint. They are medicinal. They are sugar. They are medicinal sugar. Honestly, you admire the determination. Later, as plates are cleared away, the physician discusses tomorrow's menu with the cooks beside the hearth. More fish, barley broth, pear preserves, warm wine with cloves against the damp weather. Always the weather. Cold air, in medieval thinking, lurks behind nearly every bodily problem imaginable. Cold stomachs, cold lungs, cold blood, cold moods. Entire diets revolve around protecting the body from winter's invisible influence. You rise at last and wander briefly toward the corridor outside the chamber. There the castle grows quiet again. Rainwater trickles through gutters beyond the walls. A sleepy guard leans beside the staircase, rubbing numb fingers together. Somewhere far below, kitchen servants scrape trenches clean before carrying leftovers toward the lower halls. The smell of almond milk still lingers faintly in the air. And behind the carved oak doors, the Queen's private Lenten supper fades slowly into candlelight, prayer, and the endless careful balancing act between appetite, duty, and belief. The rain finally stops sometime after midnight. By dawn, the castle courtyards glitter beneath a thin crust of frost, pale as sifted flour beneath the early light. Stable boys curse softly while breaking ice from water troughs. Smoke rises straight upward into the still morning air. Somewhere beyond the walls, crows gather noisily in bare trees like monks preparing for an argument. Inside the castle, however, calm has vanished. Tonight is feast night again. Not merely supper, but a true royal banquet held for visiting lords arriving from the western marches. Already the great hall trembles with preparation hours before sunset. Servants scrub tables with sand and rushes. Musicians tune lutes beside the hearth. Fresh beeswax candles arrive in bundles thick as a man's wrist. Even the dogs seem aware something important approaches and lurk hopefully near the kitchens. You spend the afternoon drifting through corridors crowded with movement. Everywhere people carry things, bolts of cloth, silver cups, firewood, spice boxes, salted fish, trenchers, prayer books, wine casks, embroidered cushions, tiny jars of preserved fruit. A banquet in a medieval castle resembles a military campaign organized entirely around butter. The kitchens roar with heat. Open fires blaze beneath hanging cauldrons while cooks shout through clouds of steam. Geese turn slowly on spits. Pastry dough covers entire tables dusted white with flour. Kitchen boys run endlessly between cellars and hearths carrying wine, onions, herbs, and more firewood than seems physically possible. The brown dog following you has achieved legendary status among the servants after successfully stealing half a sausage from a distracted scullion that morning. Frankly, morale appears high. Yet beneath the excitement, tension coils quietly through the household. You notice it first near the side kitchens where several dishes wait beneath linen cloths, guarded more carefully than royal treasure. The physician stands nearby, speaking in low tones with the Queen's food taster, a narrow-faced man who looks permanently suspicious of soup. "Too much nutmeg," the physician murmurs. "It came directly from the spice chest." "Exactly my concern." The taster sighs deeply, which suggests this conversation happens often. Royal feasts may appear glorious from afar, but beneath the candlelight lurks constant anxiety. Illness spreads easily in crowded halls, rich foods upset delicate stomachs, and above all else poison. Kings and queens fear it endlessly. Some fears prove reasonable, others drift into outright obsession. A visiting lord offering sweetmeats might trigger whispered suspicion for weeks afterward. Certain nobles travel with personal cups, knives, even salt containers rather than trust unfamiliar servants. One elderly steward quietly tells you a duke once demanded his pears tested by 3 separate priests before eating them. No one can quite agree whether this protected him from poison, or merely guaranteed extremely nervous clergy. The feast preparations continue relentlessly. By late afternoon, the hall transforms completely. Fresh rushes mixed with lavender cover the stone floors. Long white cloths drape the tables. Tapestries depicting hunts and saints hang between torch brackets. At the high dais, silver plate gleams beside crystal imported at terrifying expense from southern lands. The air itself smells rich enough to make you sleepy roasting meat, cloves, hot wine, beeswax, oranges, and fresh bread. Yet hidden behind the public abundance, another quieter meal takes shape. The king's private dishes again remain separate. You glimpse them arranged carefully in the smaller side kitchen, lightly roasted capon with herbs, cooked pears, watered wine infused with cinnamon, soft white bread, and a little dish of preserved cherries. Meanwhile, the banquet hall prepares entire boars stuffed with chestnuts. Medieval rulers often perform appetite publicly while practicing restraint privately. A king must appear prosperous, generous, powerful enough to feed hundreds. Yet physicians constantly warn against overindulgence. Too much meat thickens the blood. Too much wine overheats the liver. Too many sweets weaken digestion. Unfortunately, nearly everything enjoyable appears dangerous according to medieval medicine. By sunset, the guests arrive at last. Cold air floods the hall each time the great doors open. Lords wrapped in fur cloaks stomp snow from boots while attendants carry trunks, hunting hawks, and enough baggage to invade neighbouring kingdoms. Greetings echo beneath the rafters. Rings flash in candlelight. Servants hurry constantly refilling cups. Then the feast begins. The first course arrives in waves, thick soups, freshwater fish, roasted onions, pies filled with minced meat and herbs. Musicians play near the hearth while jugglers perform carefully beside the lower tables. The king smiles broadly from the high seat, and eats almost none of it. Instead, his trusted servant quietly replaces each grand dish with smaller portions from the private kitchen. The substitutions happen so smoothly most guests never notice. A spoonful here, a trimmed slice there, warm wine diluted carefully. The queen performs similar elegance beside him, tasting lightly while speaking with visitors. Only the guests truly feast. One Western lord devours roast goose with terrifying enthusiasm. Another drinks enough wine to begin complimenting tapestries personally. A bishop near the centre table insists loudly that fasting strengthens the soul, while simultaneously eating enough eel pie to alarm nearby servants. Even now, it is hard to tell whether medieval banquets celebrate discipline or surrender to appetite entirely. The physician circles constantly through the shadows like a worried ghost. You overhear fragments everywhere. Less salt for the king. The cherries first. Not that sauce. Who prepared this pie? At one point a servant drops a silver cup, and half the hall visibly freezes before realizing it contains only spilled wine. Those who tell the tale never fully agree how many medieval poisoning fears were real, and how many grew from court gossip and restless imagination. Still, tonight everyone watches carefully, especially the taster. Poor man. He samples nearly every royal dish before it reaches the high table. Tiny bites, tiny sips, tiny moments of dread. His expression throughout resembles someone deeply reconsidering career choices. Hours pass beneath heat and candle smoke. More courses arrive, venison glazed with fruit syrups, custards flavoured with saffron, sugared almonds, little pastries shaped like castles, cheeses, pears poached in wine, spiced hippocras served warm against the cold. The hall grows louder, softer, stranger with drink. A knight begins singing badly near midnight while several monks pretend not to enjoy themselves, despite obvious evidence otherwise. The king eventually retreats early from the high table under the physician's supervision. Publicly, it appears dignified. Privately, you overhear the truth. Too much sauce, the physician mutters. I barely touched it. You looked at it heavily. Honestly, medieval medicine deserves admiration for confidence alone. Long after the ruler departs, the feast continues below blazing torches and drifting smoke. Servants scrape plates, musicians yawn through final songs. Dogs roam triumphantly beneath tables gathering fallen treasures from exhausted nobles too full to notice. And somewhere behind the tapestries once again, hidden from the roaring spectacle of abundance, the true royal supper remains astonishingly small. The feast finally collapses into silence sometime near dawn. Candles burn down to crooked pools of wax. Snores echo faintly from corners where visiting retainers surrendered to exhaustion beside the dying fires. A drunken knight sleeps beneath the tapestry of St. Edmund with one boot still on, and a roasted chestnut clutched protectively in his hand, as though defending it from thieves in his dreams. The castle smells different after a banquet. Less fresh bread and spice now, more stale wine, cooling ashes, wet wool, extinguished candles, and the lingering heaviness of too much food trapped beneath stone rafters. You drift quietly through the dim passages while servants begin the endless labour of cleaning. Trenchers are stacked, bones gathered for soups, rushes swept away with all the dignity medieval dining allows. The brown dog follows faithfully beside you, carrying something suspiciously shaped like half a pastry. No questions are asked. At the far end of the eastern corridor, beyond the chapel stairs and near a row of narrow windows crusted with frost, lies the physician's chamber. Few people enter willingly. The place carries a reputation somewhere between library, apothecary, and polite threat. This morning, however, the door stands partly open. Warm herbal air spills into the hallway. You step inside. The room glows amber beneath hanging lamps. Shelves cover every wall, crowded with parchment bundles, ceramic jars, dried plants, brass instruments, and strange preserved objects floating inside cloudy glass containers. A charcoal brazier smoulders softly near the centre table while frost creeps faintly along the corners of the window shutters. The physician himself sits wrapped in a dark wool robe, writing notes with a tired hand beside a bowl of steaming broth. Honestly, after days of hearing him discuss digestion like a battlefield commander, it feels oddly reassuring to discover he eats ordinary soup. He glances up without surprise. You survived the banquet. Barely. So did the king. A successful evening. He gestures toward a stool near the fire. This chamber serves as the hidden center of the royal diet. Here menus become prescriptions. Here sauces transform into treatments. Here every pear, onion, fish, and cup of wine receives analysis far beyond what nature ever intended. On the long table before him rests an astonishing collection of ingredients. Dried rose petals, powdered ginger, fennel seeds, cinnamon sticks, small cones of sugar wrapped in cloth, bundles of sage and thyme, tiny packets of saffron locked carefully in carved boxes, mortars filled with crushed herbs, vials of oils labelled in cramped Latin script, and us in one corner, several leeches drifting lazily inside a shallow bowl. The physician notices your glance. Useful creatures. The leeches appear unconvinced by their career path. He explains that royal health depends largely upon dietary balance. Every ruler possesses a bodily temperament shaped by humour's blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. Foods influence these forces constantly. Warm foods stimulate vitality. Cold foods calm excessive heat. Moist foods soothe dryness. Dry foods strengthen weakness. At least in theory. Even now, it is hard to tell whether medieval medicine heals the body or simply gives anxious nobles complicated vocabulary for indigestion. The physician opens one manuscript spread across the desk. Diagrams of human figures fill the margins beside careful notes. The king, he says gravely, runs naturally warm and dry. You nod politely despite having no idea what that means. Therefore, excessive roasted meat becomes dangerous in winter feasts. Rich sauces overexcite the blood. And the queen. Cooler temperament, more delicate digestion. She benefits from softened fruits, almond preparations, and gentle wines. He says all this with complete certainty. Some swear medieval physicians could diagnose illness simply by studying urine colour beneath candlelight. Others suspect patients recovered mainly because they eventually stopped listening. The physician rises and crosses toward another shelf lined with strange remedies. He lifts jars one by one as he speaks. Candied ginger for cold stomachs. Rose syrup against melancholy. Violet water for headaches. Powdered coral for weakness of the heart. That last one seems especially optimistic. Beside the shelves hangs a bundle of dried rabbit feet tied with red thread. You raise an eyebrow. Not mine, the physician says quickly. The Queen's ladies insist upon them. Court life mixes medicine and superstition freely. Saints' relics rest beside herb mixtures. Charms travel sewn into noble sleeves. Certain foods are avoided on unlucky feast days. Some servants refuse pears during storms because they believe lightning favours pear trees. No one can quite agree where faith ends and fear begins. A scratching sound draws your attention toward the corner desk where a young assistant copies dietary schedules onto parchment. Breakfast soft eggs, warmed wine, pears. Midday fish stew, rye bread, mint syrup. Evening capon broth, cooked apples, watered ale. Every meal planned, every spice measured. The assistant yawns while sprinkling sand over fresh ink. The king changes his mind constantly. He mutters, "Yesterday onions prevented fever. Today onions invite lethargy." The physician overhears. Preparation matters. Of course. And quantity? Certainly. And season? Obviously. The assistant's expression suggests onions now possess more political complexity than most kingdoms. Outside the narrow windows, Pale morning light spreads slowly over the snowy courtyards. Bells toll again from the monastery across the valley, muffled by winter air. The physician ladles broth into 2 small cups and hands one to you. It tastes surprisingly good. Leeks, herbs, a little garlic, perhaps barley thickening beneath the surface. Simple, comforting, not remotely theatrical. You see, he says quietly, real nourishment rarely resembles feast food. He gestures toward another table where untouched banquet leftovers await inspection. Rich pies, sugared pastries, heavy roasted meats. Pleasure weakens restraint. But surely kings enjoy feasts. They enjoy surviving feasts. A fair distinction. The conversation drifts toward older remedies still whispered through noble courts. Broth simmered with gold leaf, sleeping draughts containing poppy syrup, powdered pearls dissolved into wine for fertility, tiny cakes flavoured with anise to prevent nightmares after heavy meals. Those who tell the tale never fully agree which remedies truly worked, and which merely comforted frightened rulers facing cold winters, disease, and endless uncertainty. The physician eventually opens a locked cabinet near the hearth. Inside rests the rarest stock of all citrus fruits from southern lands wrapped individually in cloth. Lemons, bitter oranges, tiny shriveled citrons preserved carefully against spoilage. The room fills instantly with sharp, bright fragrance unlike anything else in the castle. For the queen, he says softly, during winter illness. The fruits glow almost golden in the firelight. For a moment the cold northern fortress feels impossibly far from the warm distant orchards where such things grow. Then the physician closes the cabinet again. Outside, servants begin hauling fresh water across the yard while cooks prepare another day's measured meals. The castle wakes slowly beneath frost and smoke. And inside this warm chamber of herbs, charts, charms, and theories, the secret diets of kings and queens continue quietly beneath the steady scratching of ink. 2 mornings later, the castle wakes before dawn beneath a sky the colour of cold iron. Frost hardens the courtyard mud into rough ridges that crunch beneath boots and wagon wheels. Torches flicker along the outer walls while sleepy stable hands lead stamping horses through clouds of steaming breath. Today the king hunts, and whenever medieval kings hunt, entire households suddenly behave as though preparing for migration across a frozen continent. Servants rush everywhere carrying cloaks, bows, wineskins, blankets, saddles, knives, hawks, baskets of provisions, and enough rope to secure a small fortress. Hunting parties rarely travel lightly. Nobles may spend hours or even days crossing forests, marshes, and distant estates in pursuit of deer, boar, hare, or simply an excuse to escape stone walls and political arguments. You stand near the stable yard, warming your hands beside a brazier while the brown dog circles excitedly between horses. Somewhere nearby, a groom curses because one mule has decided this morning would be an excellent time to reject civilization entirely. The king emerges wrapped in layers of fur-lined wool, looking far more awake than he ever appears at banquet tables. Cold air reddens his cheeks. A hunting horn hangs at his belt beside a broad knife polished bright as ice. The physician appears moments later carrying food. Of course, even hunting expeditions require carefully managed royal diets. A servant loads small travelling chests onto pack horses while the physician inspects their contents with grave concentration. Inside rest compact provisions chosen not merely for convenience, but according to health, weather, and the king's digestion. Smoked venison, dark rye bread, hard cheese, dried figs, candied ginger, small pies filled with herbs and minced fish, flasks of warmed wine mixed lightly with cinnamon against the cold. No one can quite agree whether medieval kings hunted for sport, power, fresh meat, or simply to avoid listening to physicians discuss onions indoors. Perhaps all four. The hunting party finally rides out through the gatehouse beneath paling stars. Hooves strike frozen ground sharply. Hunting dogs bark ahead through drifting mist. You ride among servants near the rear while dawn slowly spreads silver over the countryside. The world beyond the castle feels hushed beneath winter. Fields lie stiff with frost. Bare orchards stand black against the whitening horizon. Thin smoke rises from village chimneys, where peasants already stir oat porridge over morning fires. Along the roadside, tiny shrines shelter candles flickering weakly behind cloudy glass. A group of pilgrims passes heading north, their cloaks damp with cold mist and little tin badges pinned proudly to their hats. One raises a hand in blessing toward the king's company. Another simply stares longingly at the pack horses carrying food. Honestly, understandable. The forest swallows the road by mid-morning. Tall pines darken the snow-patched earth while bare branches clatter softly overhead in the wind. The smell changes here: pine resin, wet bark, horse sweat, cold streams hidden beneath ice. Hunting horns echo faintly through the trees. Servants spread gradually outward as the party tracks deer signs along frozen paths. The king rides ahead with several nobles while beaters move through underbrush startling game from cover. You remain nearer the supply carts where breakfast is finally unpacked beside a narrow stream. Travel meals differ sharply from court feasts. Food must survive cold weather, rough roads, and impatient nobles. Nothing delicate, nothing requiring silver plates or elaborate sauces. One servant slices dark bread with stiff fingers, while another warms wine over a tiny brazier shielded from the wind by stones. Smoked fish passes from hand to hand beside dried apples and little cakes flavoured with honey and anise. The king joins briefly after the first unsuccessful chase. "No deer," one lord mutters. "Plenty yesterday." Then yesterday was selfish. They eat standing beside the stream while horses crop frozen grass nearby. The physician insists the king consume warm wine before continuing deeper into the forest. Cold dampness weakens the stomach, he warns. The king drinks obediently, though with the expression of a man accepting spiritual defeat. Nearby, one huntsman unwraps a small packet of garlic and salt tied carefully in cloth. He explains quietly that many hunters carry such charms against forest spirits, illness, or wolves depending on the region. Some swear garlic keeps away evil entirely. Others simply appreciate not sharing sleeping quarters with anyone who eats it heavily. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. The hunt resumes. Hours drift by beneath pale winter light. Hounds race barking through snow-dusted undergrowth. Ravens follow overhead patiently. At one point the king's horse slips crossing a frozen creek, splashing icy water across everyone nearby except, somehow, the physician. The physician considers this proof of divine approval for moderation. By afternoon the cold settles deeply into fingers and feet despite constant movement. Servants distribute hot broth from travelling kettles thickened with barley and herbs. Tiny meat pies emerge from insulated baskets wrapped in wool to keep them warm. You sit briefly upon a fallen log while steam curls upward from your cup. The forest feels endless around you. Quiet. Only distant horns, barking dogs, and the creak of leather saddles disturb the stillness. A young page explains that hunting diets matter greatly among nobles because physical exertion supposedly alters bodily humours. Cold weather requires warming foods. Long rides demand strengthening meats. Excessive wine weakens judgment during hunts. Though judging by several laughing lords nearby, that last rule receives flexible interpretation. At last, near sunset, the hunters succeed. A stag bursts through the trees ahead, breath steaming in the crimson light, horns sound sharply, dogs surge forward, riders crash through frost and brush in pursuit, until finally the animal falls deep within the darkening woods. The moment afterward grows strangely solemn. Even now, it's hard to tell whether medieval hunting serves appetite, ceremony, or ancient instinct older than kingdoms themselves. The carcass is prepared carefully for transport while the king warms his hands beside a hastily built fire. Servants distribute evening provisions as twilight deepens hot ale with spices, coarse bread, smoked goose, soft cheese, and preserved cherries carried specially for the royal table. The physician approves only half of it. Naturally. Night gathers quickly beneath the trees. Torches glow between trunks like wandering stars while snow begins falling once more through the branches. And there beside the forest fire, surrounded by hunting dogs, steaming horses, and the scent of pine smoke drifting upward into darkness, the secret diets of kings and queens continue even far from castle walls. The hunting party returns long after dark beneath falling snow. Torches sway along the frozen road like dim orange stars while exhausted horses pick carefully through icy ruts. The stag hangs lashed across a cart behind the riders, its antlers rimed white with frost. Hunting dogs limp proudly beside the wheels, too tired now even to bark. By the time the castle gates finally groan open, the entire fortress seems half asleep. Servants hurry forward carrying lanterns. Stable boys lead away steaming horses. Somewhere above, sleepy guards peer down from the battlements wrapped in blankets thick enough to qualify as architecture. Inside the walls, warmth hits you almost painfully after the forest cold. The kitchens remain awake. Of course they do. Medieval castles never truly sleep below stairs. Fires must be watched through the night. Bread dough rises while nobles dream overhead. Broths simmer endlessly. Someone always sharpens knives beside a dying hearth, while another servant snores against flour sacks nearby. Tonight the kitchens glow low and red beneath smoke-blackened rafters. Most feast preparations are finished, yet scattered pockets of quiet activity continue through the late hours. You wander inward with numb hands toward the heat. The brown dog immediately collapses beside the oven and begins snoring loud enough to concern nearby poultry. Near the central hearth, two cooks carve portions from the fresh stag while discussing tomorrow's menu in hushed tones. Fat crackles softly over coals. Steam rises from kettles of broth thickened with onions and herbs. The whole room smells of roasted meat, yeast, damp wool drying near fires, and faintly of horse. A sleepy scullion nods toward a side stairway. The king's awake again. Apparently royal digestion respects no hour. You follow the quieter corridor leading beneath the main hall where smaller service kitchens branch off like hidden tunnels beneath the castle. Here the fires burn lower. Candlelight flickers against stone walls damp with winter condensation. And here, long after midnight, the secret meals begin. One narrow chamber houses the night kitchen reserved for private trays sent to restless nobles unable to sleep. The atmosphere feels strangely intimate compared to the roaring banquet halls above. No shouting now, no spectacle. Only the gentle sounds of ladles against pottery and logs settling softly in hearths. A young cook stirs warm almond milk with honey, while another slices preserved pears into a silver bowl. Tiny oat cakes bake beside the fire. A pot of mulled wine perfumes the room with cinnamon and cloves. You notice immediately that the dishes prepared here differ from public meals. Lighter, softer, comforting rather than impressive. No one can quite agree whether medieval nobles suffered more from political stress, heavy suppers, or physicians constantly warning them about both. Perhaps insomnia simply becomes inevitable when your evening feast includes 3 sauces and a bishop arguing theology beside your elbow. A maid arrives carrying orders from the Queen's chambers. She asks for warmed wine with rosemary. And food? Only figs. The cook nods knowingly. Another servant appears moments later from the king's apartments. His Grace requests broth. What kind? He did not say. The cook sighs deeply in the manner of a man spiritually defeated by aristocracy. Then we make chicken broth. Kings always mean chicken broth at this hour. The little night kitchen moves carefully around these requests. Trays emerge bearing simple things: toasted bread rubbed with garlic, poached apples, herb broth, soft cheese, little pastries filled with dates and nuts. Foods meant to soothe the stomach and calm the body before sleep. Or at least that is the theory. One old kitchen woman explains quietly while stirring a pot of warmed ale that medieval physicians believe nighttime digestion greatly affects dreams. Heavy meats before bed may cause nightmares or melancholy. Spiced wine warms the body against dangerous winter chills. Sweet herbs encourage peaceful rest. Some swear sleeping beside rosemary wards away dark thoughts entirely. Others claim it merely makes blankets smell festive. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. You sit near the back hearth watching snow drift past the narrow windows. Beyond the glass, the courtyard lies silver and silent beneath moonlight. A lone guard crosses slowly beside the walls carrying a lantern that glows faintly through the storm. Inside, the cooks continue their midnight work. One servant carefully prepares a tiny plate of candied fennel seeds and sugared almonds destined for a visiting countess known to suffer night weakness, which seems vague enough to include nearly every human condition. Another stirs poppy syrup into warmed milk for an elderly lord who complains constantly of sleeplessness and ghosts in the corridor near the chapel stairs. Even now, it is hard to tell whether medieval medicine treats illness or simply comforts frightened people through long cold nights. A door opens suddenly near the pantry. The physician enters naturally. His hair hangs slightly loose now, and fatigue shadows his eyes, yet he still inspects every tray with grim concentration. He tastes the king's broth personally before approving it, adds more cinnamon to the queen's wine, removes 2 pastries from a nobleman's plate entirely. Too rich. At midnight the cook mutters quietly after he passes. Who fears richness at midnight? The physician apparently. You wander farther into the pantry passage where shelves overflow with winter provisions waiting for tomorrow's meals, smoked eels hanging from hooks, jars of cherries preserved in syrup, wheels of hard cheese, onions braided together, sacks of barley and rye, little packets of cloves locked carefully away from greedy fingers. A cat sleeps atop a grain chest beside a lantern. Somewhere overhead, footsteps cross the upper gallery. Somewhere else, distant laughter echoes briefly before fading again into silence. The castle settles gradually towards sleep. At last the trays depart one by one into darkness, carried by silent servants climbing hidden staircases toward noble chambers. Warm broth for the king, rosemary wine for the queen, sweetened milk for an aging lord terrified of dreams. Tiny comforts against the winter night. You remain by the hearth a little longer while the fire burns low. One cook shares the last of a honey cake with you and scratches the brown dog behind the ears. Outside, snow thickens softly over rooftops and towers. Inside, beneath stone arches warmed by dying coals, the secret cravings of kings and queens drift quietly through hidden kitchens while the rest of the castle dreams. Several days later, the castle gates open before sunrise beneath a sky washed pale with mist and lingering snowlight. The air smells sharp and metallic, the way winter mornings often do when frost grips every stone and fence post in the valley. Horses stamp impatiently in the courtyard while servants tighten saddle straps with stiff fingers. Today the Queen travels. Not publicly, not with banners or trumpets or shining lines of armoured knights. This journey moves quietly. A pilgrimage, at least in appearance. You stand among the smaller escort assembled near the chapel steps, a handful of guards in plain cloaks, several ladies wrapped in wool, 2 monks carrying relic boxes, pack mules loaded with provisions, and the ever-faithful brown dog now apparently promoted to official companion of the expedition. The Queen herself emerges dressed simply in dark travelling clothes trimmed only lightly with fur. Her veil hides most of her face from passing eyes. Without jewels and ceremony, she seems strangely smaller beyond the castle walls, more human somehow. The physician rides with the party too. Naturally, even holy journeys apparently require supervision of digestion. The road winds southward through frozen farmland and quiet villages still wrapped in early smoke. Frost glitters across bare hedges. Crows gather around harvested fields searching for forgotten grain beneath the snow. Pilgrimage routes crisscross the medieval world like veins. Along them travel merchants, monks, widows, wandering knights, sick children, holy relics, gossip, fleas, and recipes in roughly equal numbers. You pass small roadside shrines where candles flicker before painted saints blackened by years of weather and smoke. At one crossroads, an old woman sells hot onion broth from a steaming pot, while pilgrims warm cracked hands over her fire. The Queen pauses briefly there. No fanfare. No royal announcement. Just a tired traveller accepting a wooden cup of broth in the cold morning air. The old woman never realises whom she serves. Perhaps that makes the moment kinder somehow. The broth smells simple and wonderful onions, barley, leeks, thyme, a little garlic. Steam curls upward through the mist while horses snort clouds into the frosty road. The physician approves immediately. Excellent for winter travel. The Queen smiles faintly over the rim of her cup. No one can quite agree whether medieval pilgrimages strengthen the soul, heal the body, or merely provide nobles an excuse to escape castle walls for a few precious days. Likely all 3. By midday the road enters forest country where bare branches arch overhead like cathedral rafters. The ground softens beneath melting snow. Wagon wheels creak through mud while distant monastery bells drift faintly through the trees. The travellers stop near a shrine dedicated to a local saint, whose miracles apparently involve both lost cattle and stomach ailments. A surprisingly versatile saint. Servants unpack the midday meal beneath a leaning shelter roof patched with moss and old straw. Unlike castle feasts, travel food must endure cold, jolting roads, and uncertain weather. Everything remains compact, preserved, and practical. Dark bread, smoked fish, hard cheese, dried apples, small honey cakes wrapped in cloth, flasks of watered wine mixed with herbs against the chill, and, carefully tucked inside a padded basket reserved for the Queen, delicate little pastries filled with almond paste and figs. The physician insists these are medicinal. The kitchen servants exchanged very sceptical looks while packing them earlier. You sit near the roadside fire while monks murmur prayers nearby. Smoke drifts slowly upward through damp branches. One guard dries wet gloves beside the flames, while another attempts unsuccessfully to remove mud from his boots, using a stick and pure resentment. The Queen eats quietly among her attendants, taking only small portions. Warm wine, bread softened in broth, a few preserved fruits. One lady whispers that the Queen fasts lightly during journeys because travel unsettles the stomach. Another insists noblewomen simply fear appearing greedy before servants. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. Nearby, a monk opens a small leather satchel containing dried herbs and tiny wrapped packets of sugar. Pilgrims often carry medicinal foods on long roads: candied ginger against nausea, fennel seeds for digestion, dried mint for bad water, little cakes made with honey and spices to restore strength during winter marches. Even now, it is hard to tell where medicine ends and comfort begins in medieval travel. The afternoon grows colder as the party continues onward. They pass pilgrims walking barefoot despite frost because certain holy vows apparently require extraordinary discomfort. One man drags heavy chains behind him through the mud while reciting prayers. Another carries a scallop shell badge pinned proudly to his ragged cloak. The queen watches silently from horseback. Perhaps rulers understand pilgrimage better than most. Medieval kings and queens spend much of life performing certainty for others, while privately fearing illness, famine, war, betrayal, bad harvests, difficult childbirths, storms, and divine judgment all at once. A roadside shrine begins to look extremely appealing after enough years of that. By evening, the travellers reach a small priory perched beside a river crossing. Lanterns glow warmly behind narrow windows. The smell of baking bread drifts through the cold dusk. Inside the guest hall, monks prepare simple supper for the travellers. Fish stew thickened with herbs, fresh rye loaves, cooked onions with butter, warm ale, stewed pears scented faintly with cloves. The queen eats near the hearth while snow begins falling again outside. The atmosphere here feels quieter than court. No musicians, no grand displays, just tired travellers warming frozen hands beside a fire while bells toll softly for evening prayers. A young monk explains that certain monasteries serve special diets to noble pilgrims depending upon health. Light broths for the sick, honey cakes for weak travellers, herbal wines for winter coughs, fasting meals for penitents. And for kings you ask. The monk smiles faintly. For kings we usually pray harder. Honestly, fair enough. Later, as the hall settles into drowsy silence, servants prepare one final tray for the queen before sleep-warmed almond milk infused with lavender and rosemary, a little oat bread, and candied orange peel from the royal stores. Tiny luxuries carried carefully across muddy roads and frozen valleys. Outside, river mist drifts pale beneath the moon while monastery bells echo across the dark water. Inside the priory, beneath wool blankets and smoke-black beams, the secret diets of queens continue quietly even among pilgrims and prayers. Morning arrives slowly beside the priory river. Mist hangs low across the frozen water while pale sunlight struggles through heavy clouds. Somewhere beyond the guest hall walls, monks chant the first prayers of dawn in voices soft enough to blend with the wind moving through bare trees. Frost whitens the courtyard wells and settles along the edges of wooden carts waiting beside the gate. Inside the priory kitchens, fires already crackle beneath iron pots. You wake beneath thick wool blankets that smell faintly of lavender and old smoke. The brown dog remains curled tightly against the dying hearth, occasionally twitching in dreams that probably involve heroic quantities of stolen sausage. A novice passes carrying fresh bread balanced carefully beneath linen cloths. Warm yeasty air follows him through the corridor like a blessing. The Queen's party prepares to return north before the weather worsens again, yet first the priory cellarer insists upon showing the royal attendants the monastery's winter storehouses. Supplies have become precious this season. Early frosts damage several harvests nearby, and rumours travel through the valley of villages already stretching grain farther than comfort allows. Winter changes medieval eating more than any feast or physician. Everything becomes preservation. Everything becomes storage. Everything becomes waiting for spring. You follow the cellar downward through narrow stone stairs lit by smoky lanterns. The air cools sharply with each step until your breath begins fogging faintly in the dark. Thick oak doors reinforced with iron bands stand below like fortress gates guarding treasure. In many ways, they are. The cellarer unlocks them slowly. The storehouse beyond smells of earth, apples, old wood, damp stone, onions, and faint traces of vinegar. Rows of shelves vanish into shadow beneath vaulted ceilings blackened by centuries of smoke. Barrels line the walls, crates stack toward the rafters, hooks suspend smoked meats overhead beside strings of dried fish and herbs. This is how kingdoms survive winter. One lantern flame flickers across wheels of hard cheese aging beneath waxed cloths. Nearby lie sacks of barley, oats, rye, peas, and beans carefully protected against damp and rats. Clay jars contain preserved cherries, pears, plums, and quince floating in thick syrup. Apples rest layered in straw. Onions hang braided beside garlic and dried herbs. Everything stored with patience. Everything counted carefully. No one can quite agree whether medieval winters build character or merely convince people to worship cabbage until April. The cellarer taps one barrel proudly. Herring from the coast. Another contains salted pork packed tight beneath layers of brine. Further along, wax-sealed crocks preserve butter against spoilage while shelves of honey glow amber in the lantern light. The royal servants inspect everything closely. For noble households, winter provisions matter politically as much as practically. A king unable to maintain full storehouses appears weak. A queen who manages supplies wisely earns quiet respect throughout the household. Food becomes security. Food becomes reputation. Food becomes power hidden inside barrels. You descend farther into colder chambers reserved for luxury goods brought from distant markets. Here the shelves narrow and locks appear more frequently. Tiny spice boxes sit wrapped carefully in cloth. Sugar loaves rest sealed against dampness. Dried figs, almonds, citron peel, and saffron occupy shelves no peasant family could imagine affording. The queen's attendant opens a small chest containing preserved lemons. The fragrance escapes instantly sharp, bright, almost startling after weeks of smoke and winter air. Even now, it is hard to tell whether medieval nobles treasured citrus for health, flavour, or simply because it reminded them warmer worlds existed somewhere beyond the snow. The cellarer explains how royal diets rely heavily upon these preserved stores once roads become impassable. Fresh greens vanish, fruit disappears except in dried or sugared form. Fish arrives salted or smoked. Grain thickens every meal. Thus winter tables grow heavier. More pottage, more bread, more ale, more stews simmered endlessly above hearth fires. And always physicians attempting desperately to prevent noble stomachs from rebelling against reality. You wander slowly between shelves while the lantern light trembles softly over ancient stone. One alcove stores medicinal preparations separately from ordinary food, syrups infused with herbs, bottles of rosemary wine, jars of candied ginger against cold illness, dried mint, sage, and fennel wrapped in parchment. A little leather book hangs nearby listing remedies distributed during previous winters. For coughs, honey and thyme. For weakness, egg broth with wine. For melancholy, warm spiced ale before sleep. For stomach coldness, nearly everything, apparently. Honestly, medieval medicine remains deeply committed to the idea that warmth solves all problems eventually. The queen herself descends briefly into the cellar accompanied by two ladies carrying lanterns. Her fingers trail lightly across the stacked apple crates. "When I was a child," she says quietly. I believed winter cellars felt like sleeping gardens. The cellarer smiles. In a way, they are. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether medieval nobles truly understood how fragile winter survival could become. Yet standing here among the barrels and grain sacks, the truth feels impossible to ignore. A spoiled harvest, a flooded road, a sick herd, a failed shipment, and entire households would face hunger before spring. Above ground the bells ring for the midday meal. You climb back upward slowly from the cold vaults into warmer corridors scented with baking bread and wood smoke. The priory hall glows softly beneath winter light filtering through narrow windows. Monks carry steaming pots toward the tables while travellers rub chilled hands together near the fire. Today's meal reflects the season exactly: thick barley stew with onions and carrots, coarse rye bread, smoked eel, soft cheese, and baked apples drizzled lightly with honey from the monastery hives. Simple, stored, enduring. The queen eats quietly near the hearth while snow begins falling once more beyond the shutters. One monk distributes tiny cups of warmed wine infused with cloves and herbs against the damp. A visiting pilgrim accepts 3 cups immediately in the name of medical caution. You suspect his commitment to wellness may exceed official recommendations. As afternoon fades toward evening, the royal party prepares again for the road north. Servants repack baskets with winter provisions gifted by the priory: dried apples, smoked fish, medicinal syrups, loaves of hard travel bread. Tiny pieces of survival carried carefully through the cold world. And beneath the castle, far away now beyond snowy hills, royal storehouses wait in darkness too filled with barrels, grain, spices, and the quiet knowledge that even kings and queens must eat carefully through winter if they hope to see spring again. The journey back to the castle takes 2 long days through sleet, muddy roads, and winds sharp enough to sting tears from your eyes. By the time the royal party finally reaches the outer walls again, winter has settled deeper across the valley. Snow clings stubbornly to rooftops. The river below the hill moves sluggish and dark beneath thin sheets of ice. The castle greets your return with familiar sounds: barking dogs, clattering buckets, distant bells, kitchen doors slamming against cold draughts. Smoke rises thick from every chimney, as though the fortress itself exhales constantly against the season. Inside, warmth and chaos immediately swallow the traveller's whole. Servants hurry to unpack provisions from the priory. Wet cloaks steam beside the fires. Monks disappear gratefully toward the guest hall where hot broth already waits. The brown dog receives scraps from 3 separate kitchens within 10 minutes, and now walks with the smug confidence of minor nobility. You wander toward the quieter family chambers above the great hall where the atmosphere changes noticeably. Softer voices, fewer guards, more candlelight and woven tapestries meant to keep away draughts sneaking through stone walls. Here the royal children live, or rather, the royal heir. Prince Edwin is only 7 years old, though the household already treats him with the careful seriousness usually reserved for sacred relics or unstable bridges. 2 nurses follow him constantly. Tutors monitor his posture, priests supervise prayers, physicians inspect his meals with almost supernatural vigilance. Because medieval childhood, especially among nobles, feels terrifyingly fragile. Illness steals children quickly in these centuries. Fevers, winter coughs, spoiled milk, bad air, bad water, bad luck. Even now, it is hard to tell how many remedies truly help and how many merely comfort frightened parents watching candles burn beside sickbeds. You find the prince seated near a narrow window overlooking the snowy courtyard below. He wears layers of wool despite the roaring hearth nearby, and appears deeply offended by a bowl of oat pottage resting before him. "I hate raisins," he announces to absolutely everyone. The nurse remains unmoved. His Grace requires strengthening foods. "I would rather require honey cakes." A reasonable position, honestly. The Queen sits nearby embroidering quietly while listening to the exchange with visible amusement. Beside her rests a little silver cup containing warmed almond milk scented with nutmeg. The prince's breakfast has clearly become a battlefield. Children in noble households follow highly supervised diets from infancy onward. Physicians fear weak digestion, poor growth, excessive heat, dangerous chills, bad humours, spoiled teeth, and nearly every fruit known to humanity. Young heirs especially receive carefully measured foods believed to encourage strong bodies and balanced temperaments. Soft eggs, warm milk, fine white bread, gentle broths, cooked fruits, light fish, almost nothing considered overly rich, cold, or difficult to digest. Though children, naturally, desire exactly those forbidden things. The physician arrives moments later carrying a leather pouch full of herbs. Of course he does. Prince Edwin visibly wilts. "Again, you coughed yesterday." "I coughed because the tutor makes Latin sound painful." The Queen lowers her embroidery to hide a smile. The physician prepares a tiny syrup made from honey, thyme, and crushed herbs while explaining gravely that winter dampness weakens young lungs. The prince eyes the mixture like a condemned prisoner watching the scaffold assembled. Some swear noble children receive coral necklaces to protect against illness and evil spirits alike. Others insist wolf teeth sewn into clothing guard infants from fever. Those who tell the tale never fully agree where medicine ends and superstition quietly takes over. You notice several such charms hanging discreetly near the prince's bed-polished stones. Little silver saints, ribbons tied with knots meant to ward off nightmares. The nurse finally convinces him to finish the oat pottage by promising sweet pears afterward. Victory arrives slowly but decisively. Outside the windows, snow drifts lazily through the courtyard while servants haul fresh firewood beneath covered walkways. Somewhere below, cooks prepare the midday meal. The smell rises faintly, even hear onions, fresh bread, roasting capon, herbs crackling in butter. The prince receives lessons while eating slices of softened apple dusted with cinnamon. His tutor reads from a book describing ancient kings who supposedly conquered entire kingdoms through discipline and wisdom. The prince interrupts. "Did they also eat raisins?" The tutor hesitates. "No one can quite agree. You suspect history improves considerably under that policy." Later in the afternoon, you follow the nursemaids toward the nursery kitchens where meals for the royal children are prepared separately from the great household tables. The room feels warm and comforting compared to the smoky enormity of the main kitchens below. Small loaves cool beside the fire. Milk simmers gently in copper pans. Broths bubble quietly with herbs and barley. A cook carefully mashes root vegetables into smooth puree, while another trims crusts from little rounds of white bread. Everything here feels softened, safer. Even the knives seem less threatening somehow. One nurse explains that noble children often avoid heavy meats until older, because physicians fear overtaxing delicate stomachs. Rich sauces, strong wine, excessive spices. These belong to adults and their apparently endless digestive crises. Children instead receive milder foods believed to encourage calm humours and proper growth. Though secretly, the cook admits, Prince Edwin steals sugared almonds whenever possible. He hides them inside prayer books, she whispers. Honestly, that feels historically inevitable. The Queen joins the nursery meal after sunset. Tonight the prince receives fish stew thickened with almond milk, warm bread with butter, baked pears, and a tiny cup of diluted wine mixed mostly with water. The physician approves solemnly, then immediately warns against too much pear. Naturally, candles flicker softly against painted walls while snow thickens beyond the shutters. The Queen tells quiet stories beside the hearth about saints crossing frozen rivers and kings disguised as pilgrims. The prince listens sleepily while clutching a little carved wooden horse worn smooth with use. In these quieter family chambers, the hidden diets of royalty feel less political somehow, less ceremonial. More tender, meals become protection, a warm bowl against winter, a careful remedy against fever, a mother persuading a stubborn child to eat softened apples while storms gather beyond the walls. The prince eventually falls asleep wrapped in wool blankets beneath embroidered saints and tiny protective charms hanging near the bedposts. The Queen lingers a moment longer beside the candlelight watching his steady breathing. Outside, the castle groans softly beneath winter wind. Inside, tucked away above roaring kitchens and crowded feast halls, the future king sleeps with raisins reluctantly conquered for another day. Winter tightens around the castle completely now. Snow lies deep against the outer walls and fills the narrow lanes of the village below. The river moves black beneath sheets of broken ice. Trees stand bare and stiff against pale skies that darken almost as soon as morning begins. Smoke drifts constantly from chimneys across the valley, carrying the scent of oak fires and damp straw through the frozen air. Inside the fortress, preparations for the final great feast before the deepest winter months have consumed the household for days. Tonight the hall must blaze with warmth and abundance, because when the world outside grows cold and uncertain, medieval rulers answer with spectacle. You wake before dawn to the sound of chopping knives echoing from the kitchens below. Already the fires roar. Servants haul barrels from the storehouses you visited weeks earlier. Salted venison, smoked goose, preserved apples, onions braided in long ropes, wheels of hard cheese, sacks of winter grain. The castle seems determined to eat the season before the season can eat it first. By mid-morning, the kitchens become almost unbearable with heat and noise. Steam clouds the rafters, fat crackles over open fires. Flour dust floats pale in torchlight like drifting snow. Every table disappears beneath preparations. Pies stuffed with minced meat and dried fruits. Fish stews thickened with almond cream. Honey cakes shaped like little castles. Roasted boar glazed with spiced wine. Custard scented with saffron. And endless loaves of fresh bread stacked high beneath linen cloths. The brown dog wanders proudly through the chaos, receiving accidental gifts from overwhelmed cooks who no longer possess the strength to resist him. One scullion mutters, "At this rate the creature will inherit land." Honestly, deserved. Yet amid all the public abundance, the quieter rituals continue behind the scenes. The physician moves through the kitchens carrying his little notebook like a man inspecting battlefield defences. He checks spice mixtures personally, orders lighter sauces for the royal table, removes overly salted dishes entirely. No heavy goose for the king tonight. The cook stares at him in despair. It is winter feast goose. It is also indigestion waiting patiently beside a candle. The cook mutters something uncharitable about physicians and root vegetables. No one can quite agree whether medieval royal diets preserve health or simply deny powerful people the best parts of supper forever. By afternoon, snow begins falling again beyond the narrow windows. Great flakes drift slowly across the courtyard, where servants hurry beneath cloaks carrying fresh rushes into the hall. Beeswax candles are placed everywhere tonight along tables, near tapestries, beside the dais, around the musicians' gallery. Warm golden light slowly transforms the cold stone chamber into something softer, almost magical. The Queen supervises final arrangements near the high table, while ladies pin greenery and winter berries along the walls. Prince Edwin runs briefly through the hall, chasing the brown dog before both are captured firmly by exhausted nursemaids. The prince protests loudly. "I am helping." "You are covered in flour." "That is kitchen wisdom." A difficult argument to defeat, honestly. As twilight settles, the guests begin arriving. Lords wrapped in heavy fur cloaks shake snow from boots beside roaring braziers. Merchants from southern towns bring little boxes of sugared citrus peels and spiced wine syrups as gifts. Monks from nearby abbeys arrive with cheeks red from cold winds and expressions suggesting they absolutely intend to enjoy feast pastries despite every sermon delivered this month. The great hall fills slowly with heat, smoke, music, and conversation. Outside, winter darkens the world. Inside, candlelight pushes it back. The feast begins with ceremony. Trumpets sound. Servants process between tables carrying steaming dishes, while musicians play near the hearth. The scent alone feels overwhelming after weeks of travel meals and winter broth. Roasted meats. Mulled wine. Cloves. Honey. Rosemary. Fresh bread torn open beneath eager hands. The guests eat enthusiastically. The king performs enthusiasm convincingly. Yet you notice the same quiet pattern continuing beneath the spectacle. While the public dishes grow heavier and richer throughout the evening, the royal household still maintains careful restraint behind the scenes. The king's portions arrive trimmed smaller. The queen receives more cooked fruits and fish than meat. Prince Edwin is denied his fourth honey cake after a direct intervention from the physician that nearly causes diplomatic collapse at the high table. Even now, it is hard to tell whether royal feasts celebrate appetite or discipline more intensely. A visiting lord boasts loudly about consuming 3 whole geese during a feast in Burgundy years earlier. The physician whispers to you, and likely suffering for months afterward. Some things never change. The later courses arrive glowing beneath candlelight pears poached in wine, little pastries filled with almonds and figs, cheeses wrapped in herbs, sugared nuts from distant ports, hippocras warmed with cinnamon and cloves against the cold. Outside the shutters, snow thickens silently over the battlements. Inside, music softens. Voices blur gently together beneath the rafters. The feast grows slower now, calmer somehow, as though everyone senses winter deepening beyond the walls and wishes to hold warmth a little longer. A monk near the lower tables tells an old story about a king who fasted through an entire winter to prove spiritual devotion. Another monk quietly replies, "Then he was either holy or very poorly advised." Those who tell the tale never fully agree. Near midnight, servants begin carrying smaller private trays once more toward the royal chambers. Warm wine with herbs, soft bread, preserved fruits from the winter stores, tiny comforts prepared carefully after the public spectacle ends. The king eventually rises from the dais with visible relief hidden beneath royal dignity. The queen lingers slightly longer beside the fire, speaking softly with Prince Edwin, whose eyelids droop heavily despite heroic resistance. Candles burn low. Wax pools across silver holders. Music fades gradually into the crackling of logs. You step briefly toward the hall entrance where cold air slips through the seams of the great doors. Snow covers the courtyard completely now. Lanterns glow dimly through the storm, while distant monastery bells drift faintly across the valley. Behind you, the final winter banquet continues softly beneath warmth and candlelight. Ahead lies only darkness, snow, and the long, deep season still waiting beyond the castle walls. The feast fades slowly into the deepest hours of night. One by one, the guests disappear from the great hall, drifting toward guest chambers wrapped in heavy cloaks and wine-soft exhaustion. Musicians pack away their instruments beside dying fires. Servants move quietly now, too tired even for gossip, scraping trenches clean beneath the last trembling candle flames. Outside, snow continues falling over the sleeping valley. The castle itself seems to exhale. You remain near the hearth long after the noise fades, warming cold hands beside embers collapsing inward with soft red sighs. The brown dog sleeps at your feet, twitching occasionally in dreams of kitchens and impossible sausages. Somewhere far above, shutters creak gently against the winter wind. The hall looks smaller now without ceremony. No glittering spectacle. No booming laughter. Only rushes scattered across worn stone floors, long oak tables stained by centuries of meals, and smoke-dark beams disappearing into shadow overhead. At the far end of the chamber, a few servants prepare the final trays of the night. Not feasting platters now. Just quiet things. Warm broth. A little softened bread. Stewed pears. Rosemary wine. Candied fennel. The hidden meals once more. The true meals, the ones never sung about by poets. You watch as the physician himself carry a covered cup toward the royal chambers without escort or ceremony. His steps move slowly tonight. Even he appears worn thin by winter, by rich foods, by endless caution. Perhaps kings and queens are not the only people burdened by these secret diets after all. The fires settle lower. Snow brushes softly against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, monastery bells ring the late hour across the frozen dark. No one can quite agree whether medieval castles ever truly sleep. There is always someone awake somewhere, a monk praying beside a candle, a baker kneading dough before dawn, a guard stamping warmth into frozen feet along the walls, a mother soothing a coughing child, a servant banking embers against the cold. And always kitchens, always simmering pots, always bread rising quietly beneath cloth, always winter hunger waiting patiently outside the gates. You wander at last from the hall into the quieter passages beyond. The corridors glow faintly with scattered lanterns. Tapestries stir almost imperceptibly in the draughts creeping through ancient stone. Somewhere nearby, you smell lavender and smoke from the Queen's apartments. A maid passes carrying folded blankets warmed near the hearth. Another carries a tiny silver dish holding sliced apples sprinkled lightly with cinnamon for the prince's bedside table. Even now, nourishment follows royalty everywhere like a second shadow. The prince sleeps beneath wool blankets and embroidered saints while little charms hang beside the bedpost to guard against fever and bad dreams. The queen rests nearby after another long evening of smiling through ceremony and carefully measured indulgence. The king, somewhere deeper within the private chambers, likely drinks one last cup of warm spiced broth, while the physician mutters warnings about digestion into the darkness. Tiny rituals, tiny protections, small comforts against the cold uncertainty of medieval life. You descend slowly toward the lower kitchens again. The great fires there have been banked low for the night beneath the ash and glowing coals. Only 2 servants remain awake. One shapes tomorrow's bread dough with slow, tired hands, while the other stirs a pot of oat porridge for the dawn watchman. The room smells peaceful now. Warm grain, wood smoke, honey, damp wool drying beside embers. Gone are the roaring feasts and frantic preparations. In their place remains only the simple rhythm that truly sustains the castle through winter. A loaf rising quietly, a kettle steaming softly, a bowl waiting for hungry hands. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the secret diets of kings and queens ever truly made them healthier. Physicians argued endlessly. Monks copied ancient theories by candlelight. Cooks balanced spices and humours with solemn concentration. And yet in the end, everyone sought the same thing. Warmth. Comfort. A little strength against the cold. A peaceful night's sleep beneath thick blankets while storms whispered beyond the walls. You sit near the last glowing hearth while snowlight reflects faintly through the high windows. The brown dog shifts closer against your boots with a sleepy sigh. Above you, the castle settles fully into silence at last. No music now. No shouting kitchens. No feast horns. Only the crackle of embers and the distant breathing of hundreds of sleeping souls gathered together against winter darkness. The hours drift softly. The candle beside you burns lower and lower until wax pools quietly around its base. Shadows lengthen across the stone floor. Outside, snow covers roads, forests, monasteries, market squares, pilgrim paths, and frozen fields alike beneath one endless pale blanket. The world beyond the castle disappears into stillness. And here, beside the fading fire, the long journey through hidden royal kitchens, winter storehouses, monastery remedies, midnight broths, hunting meals, almond milk fasts, sugared medicines, and candlelit feasts begins to feel dreamlike itself, as though the castle had only existed for a little while inside the glow of the hearth, as though somewhere far away the bells are already fading into sleep. The embers dim gently now, softening from red to gold to ash. The cold stones hold their ancient silence. The kitchens rest. The physicians finally stop speaking about onions. And at last the castle sleeps beneath the falling snow. In the final quiet of the night, the world seems softer than before. The harsh winds beyond the walls lose their edge beneath the deep snow, and even the old beams overhead settle into silence. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse shifts lazily in the stables. Somewhere else, water drips steadily into a frozen courtyard basin. Tiny sounds, gentle sounds, the kind that belong only to sleeping places. You remain near the dying hearth a little longer, wrapped in warmth and smoke and the fading scent of bread baked hours ago. The brown dog sleeps soundly beside you, paws twitching faintly as though still wandering through endless kitchens in dreams. Above, the castle chambers glow dimly behind shuttered windows where kings, queens, servants, monks, cooks, and children all rest alike beneath blankets against the winter cold. The great feasts are over now. The hidden trays have been carried away. The silver cups sit emptied beside cold candles. And still the castle endures, not through grandeur alone, but through small steady comforts repeated day after day, soup warming slowly over embers, herbs hanging dry beside the rafters, loaves rising before dawn, broth shared in silence after long roads, apples preserved carefully against deep winter, and soft voices murmuring in quiet kitchens while snow gathers outside. Beyond the walls, forests sleep beneath frost. Pilgrim roads vanish into white mist. Monastery bells drift faint and distant through the dark countryside before fading entirely into the night air. Everything grows still. Everything grows dim. And as the final embers soften into ash, the medieval world itself seems to fold gently into darkness beside you, warm and quiet at last.